you had described yourself as Jean Brodie in the prime of Miss Jean Brodie, and I have never heard of that novel. So, if you're a character in a book, why did you pick Jean Brodie?
Well, actually, I picked Sandy Stranger in the prime of Miss Jean Brodie, who's a
Okay.
pupil in her class, and she's a young girl. She has beady little eyes and glasses. She's sort of unprepossessing, and she's very observant. And she starts out as sort of a disciple of this very charismatic um, teacher, Miss Jean Brodie. But over time, as she gets to know her better, she becomes quite skeptical of her,
Mm-hmm.
and she ends up. Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't read the book. She ends up as a nun in a convent who's become very religious and who has sort of a religious take on everything that has happened to her during this period of her life when she's under the tutelage of this teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So why would I describe myself that way? Well, I mean, I like to think I'm observant, and I don't know. I like to think that at this point in life, I have sort of a skeptical, realistic view of what I am seeing, and that naturally has led me to a more religious point of view and to be more skeptical of what seems to be very attractive and appealing and popular. I'm probably not going to be for that at this point.
Well, we'll get into it in just a second. I loved the opening chapter of your novel, The City Mother. It just goes for the jugular. I mean, you're in a therapy session and you're instantly talking about spiritual realities and whether it's a hallucination or not. And then you go into gargoyles, and I want to ask about that. That's cool. So, hey everyone, welcome. Dominic here with the Catholic Author Show. Today we're joined by Maya Sinha. How are you, Maya? Good to have you.
I'm well, thank you.
Pardon me, did I pronounce your name right? Sinha? Sinha?
Sinha, pretty close. Yeah,
Sinha. Okay.
Sinha.
Very cool. So, Catholic Author Show, it's a show about fiction for modern Catholic authors. We talk creed, craft, and co creation, and it's rooted in grit, grace, gods, and dragons. Um, I'm your host, like I said, Dominic, founder of Catholic Author, love writing novels, and excited to chat with people about how they write theirs. We're here to inspire your faith and your fiction. Maya is a nationally published essayist, columnist, and author of her new novel, The City Mother, published by the Catholic imprint Chrism Press. So, Maya, before talking about The City Mother, can you share more of your origin story? And what is it that led you or inspired you to write The City Mother?
Sure. I grew up in a small town in eastern New Mexico on the Texas border. My dad was an immigrant from India, and he was a professor, and he had a job at the local state college there. And my mom also worked on campus, and I had a couple of siblings. And so I grew up in this tiny little town, and I always wanted to be a writer, and specifically I always wanted to be a novelist. But I had to take sort of a more practical course in life for various reasons, and so I ended up going to law. First, I was a journalist for a few years. Then I ended up going to law school,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been a working lawyer, for most of my adult life. But I kept doing creative writing, and I started doing a humor column for the local paper here in California where I live. And then that sort of graduated into a national humor column for the Saturday Evening Post. And I would publish little humor pieces and essays here and there, and I published in some Catholic publications. Meanwhile, I had these notes that I started taking when my own children were babies. I had two kids quickly in quick succession when I was living in the Bay Area and on maternity leave, basically, from my law firm.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd taken a lot of notes about that experience. And so I wanted to try my hand at writing a novel, and I ended up stitching these notes together with a fabricated plot, a plot that I thought would move the story along and not just be about my personal experience, which was plotless, as our lives tend to be. But there was a lot of material there. So anyway, over the course of a couple of years, I wrote this novel, workshopped it, got a contract with Chrism Press. They helped me a lot to fix it up. And I'm very happy to finally achieve my dream of being a novelist, and a mom and a lawyer. And I'm just very happy to have this book out this year.
That's fantastic. So, can you give us a thumbnail overview of what The City Mother's about and then why you picked that name?
Yeah. The City Mother it's a short novel, a literary novel set in modern day America. I would say it's set around 2010. And the main character is a young woman named Cara Nielsen. She grows up in a small town, and she's a newspaper reporter. She gets married to her boyfriend, who's also a newspaper reporter, a smart, ambitious guy, and they move to the big city. It's not a named city; it's just the city. And anyway, they have a couple of kids, and the novel is about the changes that brings to their lives and the things they have to reckon with as parents and as individuals living in the city now with children, how their lives have completely changed, and the I guess, the spiritual journey, I guess you would say, of the mother, the main character. And it's also woven into that setting is kind of a psychological suspense plot, sometimes called domestic noir, where there's sort of creepy or mysterious things going on around the domestic
Okay.
setting.
Okay, there's a genre. It's just so funny. You start digging into the spectrum and you can split ad infinitum. So I've never heard of domestic noir. That's cool. Um, can I ask what inspired you to write that kind of story as opposed to a noir or like a psychological or spiritual thriller or something more
Yeah.
just domestic? Why is it that you dug into how both interact? Um,
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess the best way to describe domestic noir is all the girl novels. Gone Girl, the girl in the window, the girl this, the girl that. There was a whole collection of the girl and the mother and the sister. They tend to be about women,
mm,
and there was actually like a parody of them on Netflix not long ago because it's women who have a sense that something is terribly wrong, and they try to find out what's happening. So anyway, my story, the narrator's spiritual journey when she has these kids, she suddenly becomes very aware, in an Augustinian sense, I guess you'd say, of the presence of evil, the pervasiveness of evil, and really the kind of world that she has brought these two children into. And I mean, that just starts to sort of creep her out. I don't know, just to put it, glibly. And she starts having to grapple with these spiritual realities. And
mhm,
so and also with the problems that arise in her own marriage and the challenges she's facing and the isolation she has. It's a bit of a gothic novel in a way, a modern gothic, where you have this young woman in this building full of sort of eccentric people, and she's sort of trapped there, and there's a certain amount of anxiety and darkness sort of closing in on her. And so to marry the sort of maternal domestic part of the novel with the suspense, sort of creepy part of the novel, discovering the sort of dark underbelly of life in the city and life in general when you're a parent and really realizing what that means,
mhm.
those seem to go naturally together. And just from an entertainment perspective, I like novels that move along, that aren't just sort of wallowing in this sort of literary, space, that,
Uh-huh.
that move along. Like, you want to know what's happening. So I like suspense novels and something with a plot.
Hmm. No, I think it's one of personally it's one of my favorite kinds of stories is where you're kind of getting a peek under the hood at how reality also works and how it can work for some people. Um, you've said this now maybe once or twice. Life in the city and coming to grips with that or grappling with that. So life in the city as opposed to how life is different elsewhere and what makes it unique about spiritual tenor of living in a city.
Sure. Well, one of the reasons I chose not to name the city, right? And people have thought that it's New York, or it's Chicago, or it's here, it's there. I wanted it to be kind of a generic modern Western city, because in the back of my mind was, Saint Augustine's distinction between the city of God and the city of man. And of
Mm.
course, the city of man is a fallen world in which evil exists, and you're just sort of a pilgrim, sort of doing your best in a world that is never going to be perfect, and that really has a lot of darkness in it, you know. And so it's the contrast of bringing these very innocent children that you instinctively want to protect into the city of man, or the city, which is really not a great place in a lot of ways. So so that was one of the reasons. And the city is a tough place. I mean, just practically speaking, it's a tough place to be a mom when
Mhm.
you're alone. It's a tough place. I mean, I think during COVID, people have figured that out. To be alone in your apartment, cut off from people in a city atmosphere, it can be impersonal, it can be cold. It's a very hyper competitive atmosphere. There's not a lot of people, bringing you a casserole or trying to help you out. Like, it's
Yeah.
sort of a dog eat dog world, right?
Hmm.
And to be a woman with a young child or children in that environment is very tough, because I experienced that myself, and it's not easy. So it's both. It's sort of a practically harsh, very modern, atomized environment,
Hmm.
and it also has spiritual significance. And, like, yeah, this is kind of what the world is, and especially the modern world.
Hmm.
It's not really a soft landing for mothers or parents necessarily.
Hmm. Not having read the full book and only having read the previews, um, you make the mention of gargoyles in the first chapter, and I said I wanted to ask you about that. Does that continue to play sort of a motif in throughout the rest of the book? Let me ask that. Is that a part of is that a theme or a motif of these things kind of
Sadly,
looking at
there's
you or just
only
being
one mention
present?
of gargoyles in the book.
Okay.
That was the
All right.
only one. But the point she is making to her therapist doesn't really understand what she's even talking about, but she's
Mm-hmm.
saying, um, in a medieval city, the center of town was the cathedral, right, or the church, like you see in Paris. And she talks about the poet Baudelaire, who sort of, mooched around Paris all his life, writing about the darkness there. So
Mm-hmm.
here she's mooching around to the city with her child in the stroller, and she says, back in those olden times, a church with gargoyles and things that represent the reality of evil. That was what everybody's focus was on.
Mm-hmm.
And here in the modern city, it's ads and it's clothing boutiques and it's lattes and it's sushi and it's this and it's that and nothing, all these sort of um, consumer goods that are sort of in your face. Nothing acknowledges that you are in a fallen world where evil exists, but that is a reality that she herself is becoming more and more aware of.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just kind of a cognitive dissonance that, why doesn't anything in my world acknowledge
Mm-hmm.
where we really are? And that's where the gargoyles come into it.
Gotcha.
But that was a more honest depiction of reality.
No, I agree. And I think it's, I've been thinking about those more recently. My mind keeps coming back to them. And I was researching them, I think, in the last month or so, which is why it was just intriguing to see that in there in chapter 1 and during a therapy session. But, and why should the characters reflecting on this? I'm curious, you did a bunch of, you said your own note taking on your own experiences, and so that's like lived experience research. Did you do any? How do you handle additional research for any other
We did. Well,
topics that go into this?
yeah, there were several. I mean, this novel sort of came to be over several years because, like I say, my kids are teenagers now, and I took the notes when they were babies. So the lived experience level was, being sort of like sleep deprived and in kind of a weird space, and having these two little kids and writing down literally like what they would say or what the day was like, things that you almost sort of forget. Like I couldn't recall those things now,
Mm-hmm.
or what my son would say when he was toddling around. I mean, things that are sort of hilarious, but they also they belong to a very certain, period of life. And then when I wanted to shape it into a novel, I started researching, the kind of novel it could be, like the structure of it. And so I read about this, this genre of different kind of genres of novels, different plot structures, and I liked this sort of, suspense, or it was called the female gothic was the term I used, what they used.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at novels like Rosemary's Baby that have like a mother who feels imperiled in an apartment in a city. I tried to get my mind around like writing it as a sort of suspenseful novel,
Mm-hmm.
in addition to just my experiences of having little kids.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, there's a lot of references to, poems and plays, a lot of literary references, and a lot of references to movies in the book because she
Mm-hmm.
has a very active imagination and she's alone a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you'd call that research, but I would just put in books, that meant something to me, or that, they gave me ideas, and
Mm-hmm.
that I wanted to use them as a jumping off point. So I've been a reader my whole life. I was an English major, and I like movies. And so a lot of that research was just works of art that were very interesting to me,
Mm-hmm.
and had some bearing on her situation.
Thank you. You used a phrase I'm really intrigued by. You said female gothic.
Yeah.
I've got a vague sense of gothic from the interview I did with Eleanor Nicholson a couple of shows back, and then just this last episode that came out was with he's an ex-military guy who writes about exorcists who become combat veterans who becomes exorcists. So there's a bit of a thread that's starting to happen here. But what is the how do you define a female gothic? And I think for us guys out there who are Catholic authors and writing and stuff, I think it's so important to be more, not just aware, but to be more attentive to how do you say this? How women approach this kind of thing, also differently, valuing different things, looking for different themes, celebrating just different areas. So I'm curious where you would go with that.
Well, the book I read on structure, I wish I had their exact description in front of me, but it was a secular book on, writing craft. But also what you're talking about, this female apprehension of things, is what, John Paul II called the feminine genius, like a distinctly female way of relating to reality and understanding it and experiencing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big part of it. So the feminine gothic, the example that the book gave was The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, those incredibly popular novels where you have the female protagonist as kind of a dark character who doesn't fit into her environment, and who somehow, I don't really remember that, I didn't read that book, I think I saw the movie, but somehow has to sort of purify or cleanse the environment. Like she is the agent of trying to, yeah, she doesn't fit in. And she somehow, her job is to heal or fix or cure the environment. I think in that book she had to solve a crime or something like that. So just this sort of archetypal figure of a dark, not a female ingenue, but a sort of dark female figure who, through her own apprehension and differentness, changes the environment around her. And yeah, that's a
No, that's so intriguing, because that seems to come that harkens back to your title here, the City Mother, and I'm, without giving away your ending, how do you start to resolve this sense of apprehension, but at the same time, kind of what I'm hearing here, a mothering of the situation to bring about some kind of a healing?
Yeah. Well, the way it's resolved is that the Catholic faith understands that there's a lot of darkness and evil in the world, right? So that the better sense of that you have of the spiritual realities of life, the more perceptive you are, really the more Catholic you are, And so you're getting a handle on, aside from the sort of superficial consumerist world that you're in, the more that you start to perceive and grapple with those spiritual realities, well, guess what? That you're kind of like right at home in the Catholic Church. And so that's what her journey toward a Catholic view of life, I guess you would say, is brought about both by being a mother, right? And that profound spiritual experience of being a mother with a child and identifying with, Mary, and this archetypal experience of being a mother, and also being perceptive of her environment in a way that clues her into some spiritual realities, which in my view are realities. It's not like she thinks there's evil out there, like there really is, and the people around her don't really understand it or see it. But anyway, so that journey, and it does make her out of place, right? It's a female Gothic because she's the only one around her that picks up on it. So all those things kind of braided together in an interesting way. And I'd be lying if I said I sat and, and just sort of penciled it all out. But over different drafts of the novel, it just kind of hung together. And the different, people who read it, it just kind of worked, motherhood, perception of spiritual reality, being different, standing out, and then being able to fix a situation because of those unique traits.
Wow. And you mentioned there being the city of God and the city of man, like you said, that kind of Augustinian take on it all. By the end, is there a resolution of, those two cities? Like, and I imagine this is something the feminine genius does far easier, far more accurately, or holistically than masculine genius does. But to start embodying or living out the city of God in the city of man, is that something that starts to? Is that in there?
I would say so. And the thing about the city of man is that, you can't, a lot of people, we've seen a lot of people move in this last couple of years, from the city to a more pastoral, rural, sane environment, right? They get out of the city for various reasons and want to be someplace that's maybe more family friendly or more peaceful. But of course, the city of man is this world, and so you could never entirely leave it.
Right.
Maybe
it's human living just at all.
It's human living. Right. So yes, but if you know the city of God exists, which is, the faith and trying to align yourself with that as much as possible during your journey here, then that is really, that's what it's about, right? So you have to have a foot in both. Mm-hmm. And what you can't have, what she starts out with at the beginning of the novel is only a foot in the city of man. That's right. All she's got. And she quickly learns that is inadequate to the task in front of her, which is raising these children. You can't just raise them according to secular goals of, what colleges are they going to get into, and what sports are they going to play, and how much money are they going to make. That's all like, no, like, okay, that's part of life, but that is not the whole enchilada in raising kids. So I guess the goal is to have at least a foot in the city of God and try to get closer to that while you're here.
Mm-hmm. Oh, beautiful. I'm curious to ask you if you have a favorite legend or a backstory or a story that you would read growing up, and maybe as you get older, you go back and look at that and realize, wow, that was really profound. I like to return to that, to mull on that. Perhaps it influenced the novel that you wrote.
Well, there are a couple books that really stand out for me. one, I guess, when I read when I was 11, and then others as I got into more adult books. And so everybody has these touchstone books that make a big difference to
Exactly.
them. But in terms of going back to childhood, when I was 11, I read the novel A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett,
Hmm.
right? And I didn't really quite understand. I was excited because this little girl was raised in India, and I thought, oh, she's half Indian like me. But in fact, her mother was French, her father was English, and they were just staying in India. But anyway, she started out in India, so I
Right.
thought that was cool. And then her father drops her off at a British boarding school, and goes away. And she's a little girl that has everything. She has money, and she's very pampered. Her father has a lot of money. And then he dies, and she is reduced to the status of a pauper who is just a charity pupil
Hmm.
at this school. And so her life gets very difficult, and the people there are mean to her. And so what impressed me about that book as a child is that her nobility in suffering, it was a very Christian book. I mean, even when she had nothing, um, she would get a piece of bread and she would share it with somebody less fortunate. And she really had to keep her chin up
Hmm.
and suffer in a way that was noble and then didn't drag her down to the level of her circumstances. And it
Hmm.
kind of sounds like she's this goody goody little, little Disney princess, but she wasn't. She was a child who was really suffering
Hmm.
and who really bore it nobly. And then at the end, she's sort of rescued. And that made a huge impression on me because, children do suffer. And a model for it was just an incredible model of just a little girl my own age who really, she was very admirable and very, in a way, relatable. Not that I was suffering that much, but kids, just
Yeah.
life is not easy really ever.
Hmm.
And that book made a huge impression on me. And only later did I realize, oh yeah, that's like a Christian story. That's yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. I remember reading that. We grew up watching the movie version of it, and
Oh
we would
yeah.
watch that over and over again. And then I read the novel, and um, it was, yeah, it's one of the only novels I read as a kid that made me cry. I loved that
Wow.
book. I want
Wow.
to I want to come back and ask you about characterization because I love how you articulated some of that right there, and how you worked characterization with your story. But very briefly, if you're enjoying this conversation so far, please go ahead and hit like. It helps more people discover this kind of thing, discover Maya, and learn more about her book. Briefly, this interview is a preview. It's a look under the hood at the community that we're building in Catholic Author. It's the super friendly, creative community for the modern Catholic fiction writer. It's a place to give and get feedback, share your insights and your works in progress, and build a network of supportive friends. Plus, there is a whole lot more. It just keeps growing. Come and check us out. Join us at CatholicAuthor.us. So, Maya, I want to ask you about characterization because, um, as you said, life feels plotless until you get 10 years under your belt. And then you look back and go, oh, and now I see where it was going. But you were taking all these notes during um, while you were raising your children. And then you went to turn it into something that had a beginning, a middle, and an end. You wanted to give your character motivation to move towards something. Um, are your, it sounds like your stories are more character focused rather than event focused. Would that sound accurate?
I think that's fair to say. This is a novel written in the first person, and I've written other fiction. I tend not to write in the first person, but for some reason, that's just the way this story wanted to come out. And so it's very much about her inner life, her thoughts, her reaction to events,
Mm-hmm.
her interactions with the people closest to her. Because again, about women, a lot of women, especially young women who have little kids, they're not having grand adventures on the high seas. Their relationships are their husband,
Mm-hmm.
their children, their family, their best friends, their neighbors. Like that is their world,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that is how they're shaped, and that is the drama in their life. And so, yeah, it is character driven by her and her relationships with the people around her that are important to her, and that does generate a fair amount of drama.
Being an author who is Catholic, the way that you are a Catholic author, how do you handle either in writing it or maybe in the revision the the big challenge that I think all of us Catholic authors or people who are Catholic struggle with, which is not being preachy or pushy, but actually kind of putting some of those speed dial thoughts on aside and actually
Yeah.
allowing a character to really wrestle with something. How did you
Yeah, well,
handle that?
I'm a Catholic convert, and so when I started taking notes, I was not Catholic. Although I'd always had an interest. My mom's side of the family is Catholic. she left the church. She married my dad, who was Hindu, and so that was kind of the end of that. But I had always sort of grown up with an awareness, like, oh, half my family's Catholic, like that's kind of cool. So I'd always had an interest in it and read about it, but I was not Catholic at the time I started taking notes. So anyway, at some point along the line, I converted, and then of course that of course had a huge effect on how the novel turned out. But I didn't really have a problem with preachiness. In fact, I wanted to make her a very secular character. And in the early versions, she was a very like her, she dropping bad language all over the place. Like she was very secular because I wanted it to be the story of someone who was very realistic, very modern, very secular, and not a goody two shoes. Again, the goody two shoes conversion story is really like, who cares? Okay. Like you're super nice and then you become Catholic and then you're even nicer, like whatever, you need like a normal person in the world. I just think it makes it more interesting. So to write as a normal 20-something person in the city in the 2010s, I don't know. I wanted her to be a real person, and then of course I, eventually sort of cut out the bad language and all that. But she smokes and she drinks and she's not Miss Nicey Nice. And then by the end, like even that kind of person, and maybe especially that kind of person, is very attracted to the Catholic faith, and that's the kind of story I wanted to write, and that's really the only kind of story I could write.
Yes.
And so I think it's a subtle, and I think it actually would also appeal to secular readers because she's very relatable.
Right.
And then, like, this is where her journey takes her. This is the natural conclusion of the existential questions that she is facing and that a lot of people face.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
I think those are I love those kinds of stories. And I think that they're not only just needed, but they're some of the best, that it can be out there. I remember when I was younger, I was an early teen, and this one author, he was also a talk show host or something, and he went and he wrote this novel, and I remember watching an interview, and then as soon as I saw that, I went and bought the novel. But he was saying how someone was asking him, you don't seem to be like the character in your novel. I mean, you seem kind of like a little more straight-laced, and but your character is like all over the place, just and ends up with this. It's kind of a thriller kind of situation, and there's like violence at the end, and and the guy's like, well, one, it's a novel. Two, he's like, I, in my own personal life, as long as nothing happens to me, probably wouldn't do that kind of stuff. It's just not who I am. But that is who my character is. And I wanted to be real with who the character is and what he was going through. And then allow him to earn the ending. Or at the very least, kind of break down through like the layers of Dante's Inferno and come face to face with the depths so that he could learn a lesson or never make that choice again and come back a different person. Kind of like Jessica Jones in the Marvel series. I've never read the comics, but she's, again, it's like, yes, she's a little bit of a superhero, but she's also relatable, hard drinking and just depressed, and I'm curious about that phrase, earning your ending. Like you said, making the journey real from the inside out and not kind of skipping over it. And how did you, maybe in revisions that became clearer or something, but how did you make that work?
Actually, I mean, the Catholic faith really dovetails with the requirements of drama because the way you earn your ending is through suffering, right? And that's how you earn it. It's not by playing it safe and making safe, nice choices. I mean, that might work for you, but another way to earn it, that you really earn it on a deep level, is putting yourself out there, getting yourself in over her head, which this character obviously is. And then through suffering, you are transformed on a deep level to where you are ready to sort of accept, the in humility, but also with, just new insights into like what life is about, like what this all is, I think, I mean, and people who are a little more reckless, let's say, in how they live their lives, they tend to suffer a lot more than people who just play it safe. I would say. I mean, maybe they suffer in a more dramatic way. Maybe people who play it safe suffer in more quiet ways. But anyway, without suffering, if you don't really set yourself up to fail, there's not much of a story, and I don't know. I mean, I just don't know if there's a lot of spiritual growth there.
And I think that's exactly, I think that's exactly it. I'm pretty sure the mystics or the saints have spoken to suffering being the surest path towards getting in touch with what is real, what is really real. Because when like you said, And in this conversation, we're not so much talking about spiritual growth in reality, because in being Catholic or Christian, you don't earn squat in heaven. Everything is a gift, and it's all receptivity to gift. And so that's a different discussion. Yeah. But in terms of the story, in terms of creating a story and that idea of making an ending feel like this journey of getting through this story and following this character, this was worth it. This was a believable ending. I mean, how many shows have we watched where the character just kind of trots through the events and they make all the easy choices and then they win and you're like, yeah, okay, I'll never watch that again, but it was a story, I guess. But then there's those other ones that are like the character really, resents and struggles maybe and fights, and then finally, at that end, again, we're not earning the ending for like the character. It's for the reader to really respect and resonate. Maybe I don't agree with where this character went, but I can understand how they got there and why that makes sense, for them. And I think for some of us, if you can write a really good story like that, it can be like a little conversion experience, to not just walk in somebody else's shoes, but to live out that process through their heart. And I think authors that do that kind of thing can be so incredibly raw and human about how we struggle with goodness and good and evil.
I think that's right. I absolutely agree with that. And I mean, certainly my character, again, it's a first-person narrative, so you're in her head the whole time, and so you're really right there with her every step of the way. And yeah, I mean, the craft. If you read these books on the craft of fiction, the first thing they tell you is, you set up a character, and then you put an obstacle in front of them, and another obstacle, and another obstacle, and without them having to maneuver through these various difficulties, there's just not much of a story. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a story is described as somebody who wants something and then what they do to get it.
Yeah. And then what happens to them after they get it, which is a whole other thing, if they get it.
Picking up the threads or coming back. I remember someone once outlining Finding Nemo as a great little example of starting in one place, going on this incredible journey, and then coming back to that same place, or Frodo coming back to Hobbiton. Yeah. But now relating to that situation, but from a completely different point. And I think with stories that, well, one, become classics, or that endure, or just stories that people really, we really resonate with, are the ones that push you to become deeper, to become more whole with reality. So
yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, Finding Nemo, that's a wonderful story. And the challenge is, I mean, in this genre of sort of literary contemporary fiction, is that it's not really a fantastical adventure. It's literally normal people living a normal life. Yeah. And so to try to have a story arc like that with suspense and drama and resolution that's satisfying, that's still very relatable as a normal modern person, that is the sweet spot I tried to be in. And I think those books have a lot of they have a lot of appeal. Those contemporary literary novels that really get it right, that describe our modern world, and are psychologically relatable. The problem that I see about a lot of those novels is that they're not Christian novels. So you get a lot of literary writers. They can describe things very well, but they have a sort of nihilistic worldview. So the payoff is like, oh, this is terrible.
Yeah.
But of course, a Catholic story, a Christian story, the payoff is not this is terrible. Like you have to learn something from the experiences.
Yeah, it's like looking at there's that Star Wars litany where they're like, what is it? Hate leads to suffering, suffering leads to pain, or whatever it is, and then that leads to the dark side, and you're like, so therefore never have pain or never have hate. And I'm like, no, you just missed a beat. It's like all of that is life, but all of that must enter into resilience and then the capacity for joy, or it has to grow through that.
Absolutely.
So
yeah,
I think that's great. Maya, thanks for coming on today. And I'd love to, my favorite part of every show is to ask an author to wrap up, if you were to wrap in 1 minute, piece of encouragement or advice to other Catholic writers. Actually, I want to ask you that in just a second. First, how can people get in touch with you, especially if you have do you have any other novels coming out? or
Oh, sure.
projects you're working on?
I've started. I have made a very tiny start on my second novel, which I'm very excited about. I'm just trying to carve out the time
Oh,
to write it.
cool.
I have a blog on my website, so I'm trying to come up with a blog post. I'm trying to write about books and movies and pop culture things on my website. So
Nice.
try and get that going. So my website is maya.sinha.writer@gmail. Oh, sorry, that's my email address. My website is www.mayasinhawriter.com, and I'll spell it for you. MayaSinha writer.com. And there's a contact form there, and my email address, and whatever I've been up to lately, and also some of my older published work, if you're interested.
Very cool. Well, I'll put that in the show notes so people can find you. All right. So to the question then, if you had 1 minute to share a message of encouragement to Catholic authors, what would you want to say?
Yeah, writing is a very solitary pursuit, and writers tend to be introverts. No one more so than me. But what I have found is that in actually getting a novel up and running and out the door is you need help, and you need people who are rooting for you. And so I was in an online writers group for a couple years. I had a writing partner. I mean, these things just organically sort of came to be, and I'm like the least social person ever. And that is what made the difference. And then I had a very encouraging editorial team at Chrism. So find people who you respect as writers and who are willing to take the time and engage with you and engage with your work, and that will pull you over the line, because even an introvert like me, it's really impossible to do it alone. You need like some people helping you, and I'm very, very grateful for all the people over the years that helped this novel come to be.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Maya. Thanks for everyone who's been
Thanks.
listening. And until next time, keep writing.